Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And we're going to continue talking about our literature units. We've got the featured novel for the month of October entitled To All the Boys I've Loved Before. And this was written by Jenny Han. It was published back in 2014, almost 10 years ago. And so it was a very popular young reader's novel. I think it was actually a trilogy. There are 3 books in this series. And again, it was published in 2014. And we did talk about the plot in our last program.
We sure did. But today we're going to focus more on what kind of the message that the author wanted to convey, what she wanted to share. I think it's interesting because it's coming from somebody who is Asian American, and it gives that idea or what life was like for her growing up and how it is growing up in America. Being from an Asian background, right? And how you kind of fit in there. I think it's a good book for this time in our lives as well. We're going to go ahead and read through today's lesson, and then we'll be back. Hold on. We'll be back shortly. To All the Boys I've Loved Before, written by Jenny Han, was published in 2014. It's the first in a series of 3 novels in the young adult genre. Adapted into a Netflix film that was released in 2018, it quickly became one of the streaming service's most watched movies and received positive critical reviews. The plot of the novel is a romance, a coming-of-age story, and an exploration of the bonds between sisters. Laura Jean's story underlines the importance of family connections and being true to oneself. One major theme is growing up and being responsible. Margot assumed a maternal role for her sisters when their mother died, but this obligation is left to Laura Jean when Margot leaves for university. Margot both worries that they won't survive without her and resents that her family got along just fine. Laura Jean develops maturity out of necessity and puts caring for her family above normal teenage social activities, like going to parties or dating. Romance, dating, and fear of intimacy are also important themes. At the start, Laura Jean has never been in a romantic relationship. She's confined her feelings to her secret love letters, essentially freeing herself from any risk of rejection or disappointment. During her fake relationship with Peter, he tells her, "You'd rather make up a fantasy version of somebody in your head than be with a real person." Her happiness and most confident moment is when she's finally honest with Peter about wanting a real relationship with him, realizing that she must step out of her comfort zone to let someone else in.
All right, it's time for us to discuss the contents of today's lesson. Remember, we're talking about teenage romance and family bonds in our featured novel, To All the Boys I've Loved Before. Now, here the first paragraph says, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, written by Jenny Han, was published in 2014. It's the first in a series of 3 novels in the young adult genre. Genre is just a type of literature, a type of movie, action movies, detective movies, mysteries, horror movies. Those are all different genres of movies. And this is a novel in the young adult genre. Books that are meant for young readers, although adults could certainly read them. The level is probably simpler for young readers. It doesn't have a lot of difficult words and things like that. So we often, think it's pretty important for our students to read novels in this genre because, hey, it'll help you improve your English.
I think it's a great idea. If you're interested in something, you tend to focus more. I remember I was going to a school here to kind of pick up some more Chinese. And it got to the point where I just didn't want to continue because the subjects that we discussed in class weren't interesting to me. And so I got a tutor and focused on baseball. So find something that you enjoy, any kind of novel, if it's in an area that you're interested in. and buy that and try to learn English that way because there's a bigger chance that you'll stick with it if you're interested in the subject. I think Harry Potter helped a lot of people learn English better because they wanted to see what happened in the books. So they kept reading. So this is, like Tom said, the first in a series of 3 novels by Jenny Han, who is Asian American. She is half Korean. And it looks like her dad's American because and then her mother's Korean. But, I'm talking about the character, aren't I? I'm talking about Laura Jean. She's half Korean, half Caucasian, or half American, whatever. Half Caucasian just means half white. Although it's hard to differentiate nowadays. Who knows? We're all kind of mixed together now. We're talking about the author, though, today, Jenny Han, who wrote this book, and I think she saw a lot of herself in the character Laura Jean. And I also read online when I was reading about Jenny Han that when she sold her novels to a film studio, she wanted to make sure that Laura Jean was Asian. She didn't want them to turn her lead character into just another Caucasian girl. And I understand that. She's trying to represent the girls in America who have an Asian background, just to let them know, hey, you can be on film or you can be the lead in some TV show just like anybody else.
Absolutely. So again, this is the first in a series of 3 novels, a trilogy in the young adult genre. It was adapted into a Netflix film and it was released in 2018, and it quickly became one of the streaming service's most watched movies and received positive critical reviews. So I guess if you don't want to read the book, if you don't want to spend time reading the book, you can always watch the movie. Now, here in the next paragraph it says, the plot of the novel is a romance, a coming-of-age story, and an exploration of the bonds between sisters. So romance, of course, is a book about romance. You've got love going on, and I hate to stereotype here, but I think this book would probably be of more interest to girls than boys. Boys would rather read adventure books and things like that. But this is a romance novel, but it also is a coming-of-age story. If it's coming-of-age, that's just referring to the period of transition between being a child and being an adult. Usually in your teenage years, you have some experiences that change your life as you grow older, and that's what happens in this particular novel. It happens in movies all the time, but it's also an exploration of the bonds between sisters. So exploration can mean when people go out and discover new areas, like the exploration of space, for example, or the exploration of the ocean. But here we're just talking about the bonds between sisters. They kind of just throw these ideas out in the novel and see what happens in regards to sisters and how they relate to each other.
What's a bond here? Well, something that ties people together. It's that strong feeling of love or friendship, shared beliefs. Those things will make for good bonds between friends and relatives, too. So this Laura Jean story, it says, underlines the importance of family connections and being true to oneself. Think about what underline means, right? If you're studying in your textbook and something's important, you will underline it or highlight it, right? It's the same idea here. If you're underlining something, you're emphasizing something. So this story emphasizes the importance of family connections and being true to oneself. Maybe you need to get something done, or you need to present to your boss and you really want your boss, he or she, to focus on the most important thing. You might want to say, our sales have improved, and this is underlined by our sales figures. So underline is a good verb to use sometimes when you want to emphasize, and you need a word for emphasize. You can use underline. So one major theme is growing up and being responsible. Yeah, that's a hard part of growing up. You do have to be responsible, and you have to be honest, and you have to be true to yourself, but you also have to be loyal to family members, I think. I think that's a big lesson as well. That was important in my family. You were always loyal to family.
Right, and you need to be true to yourself. You need to admit when you're wrong and realize when you're right, it's not such a bad thing. And one major theme is growing up and being responsible, as we've said. Margot assumed a maternal role for her sisters when their mother died, but this obligation is left to Laura Jean when Margot leaves for university. So remember, we've got Margot. She's the oldest sister here, and the mother died, so Margot had a maternal role. Maternal means having to do with the mother and the things that she does. So she had to take over as the young mother of the house, I guess, to be responsible for that. But unfortunately, Margot has her own life, so she had to head off to university overseas, and therefore Laura Jean had to take over as the matriarch of the family, as the leading female there. And that, of course, involves a certain amount of responsibility, especially for Laura Jean, who's only 16 years old.
We'll often use the phrase step up to assume responsibility. You need to step up and take over this role, or step up and be a better role model for your siblings. So Laura Jean was left with the responsibility to be kind of the maternal figure in her family with her sister Kitty. Remember, there was a little sister Kitty. So this is an obligation that is left to Laura Jean. An obligation. Oh, we should know about this in Asian culture, at least obligations and duties. Those are very important things. These are actions that you're morally bound to do. So we have obligations to be good to our family members. We have an obligation to be polite and respectful to our parents and those in authority, like our teachers at school. That's an obligation. Well, she had an obligation to step up and assume the role that her older sister Margot had been role-playing or taking care of while she was there. But now she's gone. She's at university. And so Margot both worries that they won't survive without her. Oh, she thinks, if I leave, they'll just never be able to cope. But she also resents or feels bad or angry, a little bit angry that her family didn't miss her as much as she wanted them to. So they got along just fine after she left. We all want to feel important, all of us. But the truth is, if you leave, somebody else is going to fulfill that role that you left.
They're going to fill your shoes. Yeah. And yes, indeed, sometimes when you quit your job, you think, oh my goodness, this company is going to crumble without me. But later on, you find out that no, it did not happen. They just had somebody else take over your position, and the company's doing just fine. We'll continue talking about this in just a couple of seconds. But right now, let's take a break and listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们昨天跟前天带大家看了这个故事 To all the boys I've loved before。 Netflix 之前这个是有电影啦。好，当然我们故事好像昨天讲的不清不楚的，对不对？当然不能讲得太清楚啊，要不然这样子你如果看小说或者是看电影的时候就知道情节就不好看了嘛。不过大致上就是 A 喜欢 B 喜欢 C， 有一个女生写了很多情书给她喜欢的人，没有寄出去，然后就不小心被寄出去，然后总而言之呢，还有跟这个姐姐妹妹之间的一些冲突啊 blah 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 之类的，青少年一定很喜欢看哦。好，所以大家可以来试试看。不过今天还要看一下这个故事的主题到底是什么。我们对于一个作品的探讨啊，其实还是最重要的。它的主题，它写的流不流畅，故事吸不吸引人。那大家回想一下，其实故事的这个情节当中啊，有很多的主题比如说例如说爱情，对，谁喜欢谁，谁喜欢谁，这个爱情 romance， 或者是一些成长的故事，或者是姐妹之间的冲突，这都是这个小说的 themes 的情节。可是当然我们还是要交代一下，就是作者到底是谁呀，什么时候发行的啊。所以在第3天这个第一段当中，我们要看一下它的作者是 Jenny Han。Jenny Han 呢，他是2014年出版这一本小说的。那它是一个青少年小说，其实它有一系列的3部曲。我们在第1段第2句的地方 a series， 它是一系列的3本小说 3 novels。 而且后来不就我们说在 Netflix 上面可以看得到吗？它被改编成电影，小说是小说，拍电影的时候啊，整个情节啊、脚本啊都要重新写过，所以它这个是有改编。那当然，故事是被改编成为电影，所以在第一段第二句，你有没有看到一个 PP 开头，莫名其妙又出现 ing 或 PP， 那么主词一定是往后看逗点之后的 it， 也就是这个小说。It was adapted， 这个小说被改编成为 a Netflix film。 That 到逗点先左右括号，它是限定用法的关系子句。2018年 Netflix 就上映咯，所以其实逗点之后本来有一个 and 连接词被省略掉。2018年被改编成电影，然后呢很快就成为大家最喜欢看的电影之一，这个 and 就省略了。我们都是在讲这个电影这个小说，所以用分词构句言简意赅。大家的那个 review 啊 critical review 都蛮 positive 蛮正面的哦。我们刚刚讲说的情节的主题，接下来才是我们这个作品要探讨的一个重点。所以在第二段的第一句，我们刚刚说谁爱谁呀，谁不爱谁呀，这些爱情 romance 第一句提到了，还有成长故事啊，慢慢长大啊，成熟啊，承担啊，妈妈过世啊，要担起家里的家务啊，这些都叫做 coming of age， 这个是所谓的成长的故事。还有姐姐可能有一些嫉妒啊，姐姐跟 Josh 之间，然后妹妹怎么样，妹妹把信寄出去，有没有这些兄弟姐妹们之间这些的关系不是老想到 relation 或 relationship， 像家人这种很深的母子之间的这种关系，同样在第二段第一句Bond, B-O-N-D 这个字就可以抓出来 The bonds between sisters。 那你可能觉得很奇怪，这个不是三个姐妹吗？这个三个以上不是要用 among 吗？没有哦， between 就强调两者之间。三个姐妹当中有可能老大老二之间，老二老三之间，老大跟老三之间，这个两者之间都还是可以用 between。那当然除了这些主题之外啊，还有例如家庭的这个 family connections， 要忠于自己感受，你到底真的是喜欢谁， being true to oneself， 成长 growing up， being responsible， 要负责任啊，这些都是小说当中很重要的主题。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. This is our last day talking about our book entitled To All the Boys I've Loved Before. There are 3 novels in this series, and if you like what we've been discussing and you want to see, what it looks like, on the big screen, you can go to Netflix. They're streaming this, or they used to. I'm sure you can find it streaming somewhere, and take a look at what it looks like live and in action. Here we're talking about the novel. And when we left you, we were talking about the author herself, Jenny Han. This was published back in 2014, almost a decade ago. And like we said, it's the first in a series of 3 novels. And it's kind of all about a coming-of-age story. These kids we're discussing, for the most part, are in high school, although Margot goes off to college. I'm sure they'll follow these kids as they get older. But the plot of the novel is a romance. And as Tom said, it's probably going to be more popular among the ladies out there. But I'm sure some of the guys out there would be interested too. And it explores the bond or the ties between sisters, and also being true to yourself. It also underlines the importance of just, being honest with what's going on in your own life. And sometimes it takes a lot of courage to be honest with your friends and family.
Right, so remember Margot came back and she was kind of upset that they did just fine without her. And Laura Jean develops maturity out of necessity and puts caring for her family above normal teenage social activities like going to parties or dating. So maybe some of her friends said, hey, Laura Jean, we're having a party this weekend. Would you like to come? I'd like to, but I really have to stay home and take care of my little sister. I'm kind of the new mother in the house, so you understand. So yes, indeed, she develops maturity out of necessity. In other words, it's necessary for her to become more mature. And maturity, of course, is when you stop being so childish and you actually start acting more like an adult.
I wanted to mention, you might hear people pronounce this word maturity. I like Tom's pronunciation, maturity. That's what I grew up with. But quite a few people, at least in America, say mature, maturity.
I have heard it, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it too. I prefer mature. Maturity, just being mature is kind of having a more adult mindset, not acting like a baby or a child where you have to have your way or just kind of throw a tantrum. So she does put caring for her family above normal social activities that teens like to do. They love their parties. They like to date or at least go in groups where someone you have a crush on is going out as well. I found that dating one-on-one is not so popular. In our world today, it's more groups go with groups. But moving on to the next paragraph, it says, romance, dating, and fear of intimacy are also important themes. So we've got romance, dating, fear of intimacy is actually becoming quite close emotionally with someone. It doesn't have to be physical only. It has to be emotion where you're sharing very private feelings with someone. Or you're telling somebody close to you about something that you would hope they would keep quiet about. You don't want them telling everybody what you said. So you have to find good friends, especially at that age, who will be loyal to what you tell them and will never share things that are very sensitive to others with others.
Yeah, that is a common theme in these coming-of-age stories, the fear of intimacy and misunderstandings. Of course, I've seen that plot in many movies and books where the boy likes the girl likes the boy, but for some reason they're unable to get together because they are afraid to tell each other their feelings for each other, and then they graduate and they move on with their lives, and maybe 10 or 20 years later they discover each other and they decide, we've been meant for each other. We just had to wait so long. So yeah, that is, of course, a common theme in movies and books and stuff. And yes, that's the fear of intimacy. Those are important themes. And at the start or at the beginning, Laura Jean has never been in a romantic relationship. She's heard about them before, or she's even imagined them because she's written these love letters to boys that she never sent.
She's probably daydreamed about having a boyfriend.
Or she's fantasized about it. And she's confined her feelings to her secret love letters, essentially freeing herself from any risk of rejection or disappointment. I think all of us may do this in some form or another. We do have feelings for somebody, but we're afraid to commit, or we're afraid that they're going to not like us, or it's going to be embarrassing if we try to ask them out on a date or something like that. So one way we express those feelings is to write secret love letters or write diary entries or do other things.
Or maybe tell your very, very best friend you have a crush on someone and you hope that your friend would never share that information. But sometimes people do. They share that, which is not a good friend thing to do, by the way. So Laura Jean's never been in a romantic relationship. She's confined or kept her feelings to her secret love letters. If you confine something somewhere, it just means you restrict it to a certain place or space. So sometimes if you're naughty and you're a little kid, your parents will confine you to your room. You may not come out of your room because you were naughty. Well, she's confined her feelings to her secret love letters, and that essentially frees herself from any risk of rejection or disappointment. It's very hard to be rejected, where you say, I feel this way about you. And the person you say it to says, wow, I'm sorry, I don't feel the same. Yeah. And it's horrible. It hurts your heart. Or if you're disappointed, you want some cute guy to ask you out. And of course, he asks somebody else out. And you never get to go out. It's something all of us go through, even the really beautiful people or handsome guys out there. Everyone has had their heart broken at one point.
Indeed, and of course, you don't want any risk of disappointment. In other words, not getting what you want. You really wanted something, but you couldn't get it, so you're very disappointed. It failed to live up to your expectations. And during her fake relationship with Peter, he tells her, you'd rather make up a fantasy version of somebody in your head than be with a real person. So this is what Peter tells her. I guess Peter gets to know her a little better. She's afraid of commitment. She's afraid of being close to someone. So Peter figures this out and he says, well, you'd rather make up a fantasy version of somebody in your head. You'd rather have an imaginary lover instead of a real person, because if you have an imaginary lover, of course, you can do anything you want with that person and they're never going to disappoint you. But if you try to have a relationship with a real person, you risk being rejected, you risk being disappointed, you risk having a broken heart.
Ooh, and that's tough. It takes a lot of courage to risk that. Her happiest and most confident moment is when she's finally honest with Peter about wanting a real relationship with him. So that's a good moment. I think if you're courageous enough to be honest with people, it's usually something that you're happy to do and you don't regret it. But make sure you have good friends and family before you make that decision to share something that's very sensitive or something that's really close to your heart with somebody else. So she does. She says to herself, hey, I like Peter. I'm going to go ahead and be honest about it and see where it goes. And I think that's a great thing to do. She realizes that she has to step out of her comfort zone to let someone else in. And that's so true. To step out of your comfort zone just means to do something that frightens you, that you usually wouldn't attempt because it's risky. But go ahead and try that. Usually it comes to a good ending.
Indeed, and it looks like this book had a happy ending, and I believe it continued as a TV series, so there are probably other plot lines that they developed later on. So yes, indeed, you can start with this novel, though, read it, and then you can watch the Netflix movies and the shows and have yourself one heck of a time understanding young love. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. It's time to turn things over to our Chinese teacher.
那后来我们就有提到说 Lara 因为承担了整个家庭的责任，就变得比较成熟啦。在第二段第6句这个地方就发展出了所谓的 maturity 很成熟，而且她居然成熟到把照顾家人的事情优先于她自己正常的社交活动之上。同样在第二段第6句这里，我们可以把 put A above B这边的动词抓出来，把 A 放在 B 之上，所以他把自己 teenage social activities 这些 normal activities 就把它排成次要，照顾家人是第一优先。那当然这是一个很成熟的举动啊。不过最后面在第3段啊，还有提到一些除了 romance 爱情之外，像是对亲密关系的一种恐惧 fear of intimacy。第3段第1句当中，这个 theme 这个主题也是很重要的。为什么呢？因为 Lara 其实本来没有想过，她之前也没有什么交往的经验啦。好，我们在这边第3段第2句最后一个字的 relationship 这边就可以圈起来咯。relationship 她其实从来没有 in a romantic relationship。In a relationship 就是所谓的交往的意思，因为她自己没有交往过，然后也很害怕交男朋友不知道怎么一回事，所以就把自己的情感就局限于在秘密情书当中，自己偷偷写嘛，然后把它存起来。不过后来因为跟 Peter 假装是男女朋友，但是 Peter 其实也蛮喜欢他的，居然 Peter 也曾经告诉他说，你宁愿在脑海当中编一个幻想版本的某人，也不愿意跟一个真的人在一起，怎么会这样子嘞？这句话是一个很重要的一个 insight， 很重要的洞见，把 Lara 整个心情点出来。可是在这句话当中刚好也是一个句型，所以我们要来看一下第3段第4句这边的句型，在双引号当中 You'd rather do something than do something else， 把它抓出来。在英文当中的宁愿 A 动作而不愿 B 动作，宁愿做 A 而不愿做 B， 英文的句型叫做 would rather 动词原形 A then 动词原形 B。 为什么要用原形呢？因为有助动词的 would。 那后面的 rather 它是一个副词，就有宁愿宁可怎么样的语气。比如说我宁愿在家，我也不要在外面淋雨。 I would rather stay home than get soaking wet。 或者是说我宁愿待在舒适圈，我也不要改变。 I would rather stay in my comfort zone than change。 我宁愿 A 而不愿 B。 这句型我们中文也蛮常见的所以要特别把它记起来。当然到故事的最后， Lara 知道她自己必须要走出舒适圈，让别人进入她的生活，这样才能找到自信跟快乐。以上是我们今天的内容，希望大家喜欢这个故事。我是安娜，我们下次见。
That's it for today. Thanks for joining us, and please come back next month when we introduce another work of literature to you. I'm sure it will be very exciting, as interesting as the novel we talked about this month. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.